Hannah, who's Hannah? Well, Hannah is a student that I know and encouraged her to take this class as we were registering last semester. And I have been looking for her face amongst you, and I finally found her. So that's wonderful for me. Anyway, how are you doing? Did you know that we have a quiz that opens up today? Okay, so you may want to pay attention. So for the last couple weeks, we've been talking about medicine and healthcare. So we had Dr. Pappas a couple weeks ago, and he was from Kaiser and talked about sort of medicine and how the medical practice happens. He talked a little bit about your health. We then had Dr. Michelle Kelly, who was a family nurse practitioner, who talked about community and public health. And then this last time we had Dr. McDougall talking about nutrition. So I will introduce our today's speaker in just a moment, but the quiz covering that material will open today at noon. You'll be given 48 hours or 2 days to complete the quiz, to get online and take it, and while you're taking the quiz, you'll have 1 hour. Okay, it's 20 questions. Yeah, and so the idea is not for you to feel rushed. I hope that all of you who have been here and been paying attention will get 100%. Part of that quiz, do you remember there's a book you're supposed to be reading? Remember, the Spirit catches you when... Wait, does anyone remember what it's called?
No one owns it.
When you fall down. Okay, the Spirit catches you when you fall down. All right. Do you remember what culture that's talking about in medicine? The Hmong culture, right? Well, it just so happens that the Hmong Alliance Association here at Sonoma State is hosting a Hmong cultural art show this week. It's on Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. in the Cooperage 2. There will be various artifacts that will be showcased in order to teach the campus about the Hmong culture and its values. So that may be something that you would be interested in being a part of. So stop by Cooperage 2 at 7 p.m. on Wednesday. All right, well, to today's speaker, we're taking this whole theme of medicine and health and now moving it towards the future, right? And so we have Mr. Mark Wood here to speak with us from BioMarin. So Mark Wood has been with BioMarin since 2004. And he currently serves as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Corporate Affairs, with responsibility for all HR functions, as well as corporate communications and facility strategy. So do you know what HR is? Yeah, human resources. Okay. So prior to joining BioMarin, he was the sole proprietor of an HR consulting practice from 2002 to 2004, Vice President of Human Resources and Administration for AG Consulting from 98 to 2002, the Manager of Compensation and Quantitative Analysis at Genentech from 1993 to 1998, and he held a variety of HR positions at Wells Fargo Bank from 1991 to 93. He has a master's degree in industrial relations from Cornell and a bachelor's degree in psychology and management from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Do we have these psych majors in the room? All right, so a few hands going up. He is active in public-private partnerships for economic development in the Bay Area. So including his current role as chair of the North Bay Leadership Council and a previous term as chair of the Marin County Workforce Investment Board. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Mark Wood to our stage so that he can take you into the future.
Thanks, Lynn. My name's Mark, and I have green eyes. So let's see a show of hands. Who else in here has green eyes? All right, let's do a comparison. How many with blue eyes? Blue eyes.
Yeah.
And now let's do brown eyes. Okay, so those are the main colors. You may have violet, bloodshot. But the theory holds that green eyes here in America are the least common eye color. And you probably learned that in grade school or high school. When I learned it in grade school, I was shocked. And I was shocked because I have green eyes, and two of my siblings have green eyes. And so for me, green eyes were not rare, they were the norm. And so in grade school, to find out that green eyes were rare led me to really think about the random chance that caused my two blue-eyed parents to have 3 green-eyed kids. And this random chance is what is the future of medical science. And that future is now. And the future about which I'm speaking is personalized and targeted medicine. The power of genetic information, genetic diagnosis, and genetic treatment to address really profound medical challenges. The objective today is to describe exciting frontiers in medical science, and I want to do that by talking about biomarine pharmaceutical. Because this area of personalized and targeted medicine is what we do at BioMarin. And the key topics will be genetic diseases, what personalized and targeted therapies mean. We'll really talk about the business of biotechnology, which is a really exciting industry with an incredible diversity of career possibilities that extend well beyond people with scientific majors or aspirations. I don't have a degree in science. The closest I have is that there are a couple doctors in my family. But by my work in biotechnology, I feel like I can make a difference to people with very serious diseases. So let me talk about BioMarin for a minute just to set the context. BioMarin was founded in 1997, and 16 years later, we have about 1,200 employees across 30 countries. And we're headquartered in Marin. We've got about 600 people in Nevada. We've got about 300 in San Rafael. We've got 50 or 60 others around the country, the United States, and then the rest are across those other countries. And we specialize in treating rare genetic diseases. And we're talking way more rare than green eyes. Green eyes, depending on what country you're in, might be 10% or even 30%. Looked like in this room it was probably somewhere in that range, probably closer to 30. But we're talking about diseases where the incidence, the number of people born with the disease might be 1 in 500,000. And we'll talk about that today, about how common that is. There's a paradox here. Rare diseases are very common. No single rare disease is common, but in totality, rare diseases are incredibly common. We have 4 products on the market, meaning we are permitted by the FDA and other agencies around the world to sell those, for physicians to prescribe those. And I'll talk about that today. What does it mean to get permission from a regulatory agency to sell a therapy on the market? We have a strong R&D pipeline. That's another term that I'll dive into a little bit today, meaning we are developing additional potential therapies. The pipeline means the stuff that's coming that we're working on. R&D obviously meaning research and development. And we have a market capitalization of $8 billion. So I don't know if you've taken your finance and accounting courses or if you watch the stock market. Market capitalization means the value of the company. If you take every share of stock and multiply it by the share price, that results in the market cap. Which means if somebody was to drop down a whole bunch of money today and buy the company, what would it cost to buy it if you bought all the shares on the open market? So $8 billion. That's a lot. And for us at BioMarin, it's unbelievable, frankly. When I started there 9 years ago, it was not 1,200 employees, it was 250. It wasn't 4 products on the market, it was 1. It wasn't a market cap of $8 billion, it was a market cap of $400 million. Which sounds like a lot of money, but that's a small company by publicly traded company standards. All right, now let this slide sink in. I don't know if you can even read it. But these are the diseases that we treat with products that are approved on the market by the FDA and other agencies. And I say let it sink in. What I'd like you to do is actually look at that first line and try to pronounce it in your head. Don't say it out loud, it'll be a mess in here. But try to pronounce that in your head. And you'll understand why they call it MPS instead of calling it mucopolysaccharidosis. So these are the 4 diseases that we treat today, diseases that most people have never heard of. And in fact, at BioMarin, we have a saying, I have a saying, I made it up, that these are diseases you've never heard of, and we hope you never do. Because this is serious stuff. And instead of trying to give you a Wikipedia on these, which you can certainly do yourself, some of you are probably doing it on your phones right now, let me introduce you to a few of our patients. And I'm going to tell some stories about these patients. This is Elena. Elena has MPS 6. It's one of the diseases that we treat. Got a little information about Elena here. Elena right now is a high school freshman. And just by the looks of it, you know, she doesn't look, I'm going to use the air quotes, she would use these too. She doesn't look normal. There's something different about Elena. You can see it on the surface. And you'd really know if you saw her in person, because she's only a few feet tall. But when Elena was born, she seemed normal. Again, air quotes. Except for the circumstances in which she was born. She was born in Siberia and soon found her way into an orphanage. She was adopted as a toddler by a family in New York. And when the family adopted her, she seemed healthy. She just looked like a toddler. But by the time she was in preschool, there was clearly something wrong. She had constant stuffy nose, some troubles walking, she wasn't growing fast enough. She had weakness in her legs, numbness in her arms. She couldn't lift her arms over her head. She had a heart murmur. The doctors didn't know what was wrong. They knew something was very wrong. They knew she had some kind of disease, and they didn't know how to diagnose it, and they certainly didn't know how to treat it. This is Kendra. Kendra will tell you a very similar story. More likely her parents will start the story. She was born, she seemed normal, small birth weight, happy kid, stuffy nose, hearing disorder, heart murmur, growth problems, orthopedic problems, and mystery. You would know Kendra has some kind of disease when you see her. She's even shorter than Elena. She's an adult. Here's Vince. Vince, maybe from the back of the room, looks normal. If you met him, you'd probably think something's a little off. He looks less like he has a disease than Kendra or Elena. But he'll tell you a similar story about difficulties with his development and chronic health problems that got worse and worse and worse. So like I said, they all have MPS 6, mucopolysaccharidosis 6. We'll talk to you a little bit about MPS 6 as a spotlight on the kind of diseases that BioMarin treats and as a pathway to this topic of personalized or targeted therapy. MPS 6 is a genetic defect. What we've learned over the course of R&D on the disease, which actually dates back decades to people trying to figure out what this is, to now there being a treatment for it, We've learned that there's a problem at the DNA level, and it causes people with MPS 6 to be missing an enzyme that works within the cells. This is a very rare disease. The worldwide population is only a little bit more than the capacity in this room. This is a disease in which that missing enzyme causes problems within each cell of the body. Within the cells, we have mechanisms called the lysosome. Some of you probably know more about this than I do. The lysosome helps to process the waste products within the cells. Cells are just like little people or little communities, they process waste. And without the enzyme that's missing in MPS 6, the cells cannot process their own waste. The cells become engorged with waste, and they don't function properly. And so for Elena or Kendra or Vince, it starts out with certain body systems and winds up being fairly pervasive. Essentially all of their body systems will be affected by this missing enzyme, causing the cells to be engorged with their own waste product. It's called a lysosomal storage disorder because what's occurring is there's storage of waste product within the lysosome of the cells. It is a life-threatening disease. Almost everybody with MPS 6 will die from complications of MPS 6. Some in their teens, some will make it to adulthood. If left untreated, very few will make it very far into adulthood. And like I said, these are systemic and progressive problems. There are different types of progression of MPS 6, from rapidly progressing to slow progressing. And there's an exhibit at the bottom, hopefully you can see it in the back. But on the left-hand side is what you consider rapidly progressing MPS 6, and on the right side is slowly progressing MPS 6. And what's incredible is these are all people between the ages of 9 and 12. And so if you look back at the patients I showed you before, Vince, who looked the most normal, air quotes, is slow progressing. Kendra and Elena are in a more rapidly advancing spectrum. So you may think, well, boy, if I had MPS 6, I'd rather have slow progressing MPS 6. You know, look, they look so much more normal. But in a way, slow progressing MPS 6 is really complicated because the diagnosis comes so late, it's so hard to tell that anything's wrong. I actually have a story here of a slow progressing MPS 6 patient named Jody. I'm just going to read you some highlights of Jody's story. So this is going to sound familiar how it starts. When she was a child, she had ear infections and sinus infections all the time. When she was 5, her parents noticed there's something wrong with her shoulder, and the strap on her summer dress would fall off because her shoulder blade stuck out at a strange angle. They took her to the doctor at age 5, and she was diagnosed with scoliosis. You know, scoliosis is curvature of the spine. That was the diagnosis. Okay, Jody, you have scoliosis. At age 7, she had tubes put in her ears. At age 8, she had numbness in her right arm, and she couldn't hold her pencils right to do her schoolwork. Her hand would go numb. She couldn't feel anything. She had more tubes put in her ears. She had her adenoids taken out. But it was still, you know, you have scoliosis and you've got some sinus ear problems. At age 9, she was in PE and had trouble breathing. They took her out of class. And she never was in PE again. She actually got excused from it because she was unable to participate. But still, scoliosis, and you're a weak child. It was 4 years later that the diagnostic ability for physicians to diagnose genetic diseases was far enough advanced that she was diagnosed as having MPS 6. But this was before there was any treatment for MPS 6. So think about that as a teenager or as a parent of a teenager. Age 13, you have MPS 6, it's a fatal disease. So she was in a wheelchair in high school. She lost the ability to use her hands. By high school, she stopped going to doctors. She told her parents, I can't do this anymore. I know what's wrong with me. There's nothing you can do to help me. So I'm just going to ride this out. Kind of breaks my heart. At the end of high school, she had heart problems. She was in the emergency room, dizziness, blackouts. ER doctor said she was just on a caffeine high. ER doctor said her heart must be small. Prescribed medicine to deal with her heart rate. But it was in early 2000 she heard about a treatment that was being developed by orient called, which would eventually be called Naglazyme. She wasn't able to get Naglazyme right away because it was in clinical trials, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Clinical trials means the study of a potential therapy to see if it works and if it's safe enough for use in humans. It was 2005 when Naglazyme was approved by the FDA. Within a month of that approval, she was taking Naglazyme. Today she's 29 years old. And if you look at a website called naglazyme.com, you'll see a picture of her snowshoeing. She's regained much of her orthopedic abilities and has a full-time job. And is glad she didn't give up because she found out about Naglazyme and decided that would help her. I'm actually going to go back to Elena to talk about what's going on with Elena now. She started treatment when she was 7, so rapidly progressing, and the path of her life just happened to intersect with the path of the development of this therapy called Naglazyme. In her first year of treatment, she grew 5 inches. That's at age 7. You know, 7-year-olds grow fast, but wow. She saw progressive improvement in all of those symptoms we talked about before. And her respiratory improvement led her to really following her dream of being a singer. The year after she started Naglazyme, she performed at Radio City Music Hall. She says today she can stand up straight, doesn't really have a stuffy nose or colds very often. She breathes fine, she's firm on her feet, no infections, her hearing's great, she can see well. Just started rock climbing. Kendra's a great story. She's now in her late 20s. She works at the University of South Dakota as the social media coordinator for their Center for Disabilities. And she just wrote a book called Live, Laugh, Lemonade, about making the best of a terrible situation. She came to Weimar a few months ago, and there's a line out the door for signing copies of her book. Vince is also in his late 20s. He just finished his internship in radiology. He's particularly into hobbies that give him an adrenaline rush. So what does Naglazyme do? What is this thing that's helping these patients? Naglazyme is an enzyme replacement therapy, an ERT. Enzyme replacement is exactly what it sounds like, to replace the missing enzyme. The active ingredient in Naglazyme is the enzyme. It's identical to what these people are missing. They receive Naglazyme by going to the hospital typically once a week and receiving an infusion. It's not a shot, it's an IV infusion. It's about 4 hours. They describe it as being kind of analogous to dialysis for kidney problems, where yeah, it's tough, but it's part of your life, and if it helps you get better, why not? And it's been proven in clinical trials to improve physical endurance, and I'll talk more about why is that statement there. It sounds like something you hear in a commercial, doesn't it? Proven in clinical trials to improve endurance. Side effects may include. So I want to talk about ERTs from concept to treatment, and then we'll broaden the view on this from enzyme replacement therapies to the bigger picture of genetic disease, biotechnology, and personalized medicine. Hard to see these pictures here. These are real patients, they're real people. Down in the lower left-hand corner, that's Q Lee. She's a researcher in the biomarine lab. In the upper right-hand corner, that's Juanito. He's from Brazil. And he has MPS 6. So the basic process here for treating ERTs is if the genetics and the research shows that there's an enzyme missing. It's not just MPS diseases. There are dozens of types of lysosomal storage disorders or diseases where enzymes are missing. We have dozens of enzymes in our body. And different diseases will knock one of those out. You're missing the enzyme. If you're missing the enzyme, you have a very, very serious future. So the basic concept here is to first identify what enzyme is missing and isolate it. Then the next step sounds like science fiction. We'll talk a lot more about this concept of cloning and purifying. Cloning, the concept is to make exact copies. BioMarin is able to do that, make exact copies of the enzyme. I'll talk more about this and tantalize you with that. How do you clone things? Q does it, right? Q. And purify it. So you make a copy of it, you purify it into a form that can be administered as a chronic therapy. Chronic meaning it happens over time. This is not a one-shot deal. These are weekly doses for as long as somebody wants to be on treatment. Before you can actually treat somebody with it, you need to test it. You need to prove it. You need to prove that it's safe and effective. I'll talk more about that process in a few minutes. And then diagnose and treat. So the same medical research that enables the R&D folks to identify the enzyme, determine what's missing, is what's used to figure out what the basis of disease is. So if there's a diagnosis of MPS 6, we think any physician in the world who finds a diagnosis of MPS 6 is going to advise their patient to explore naglazyme for treatment. There's no other treatment for MPS 6. Likewise, naglazyme doesn't work for any other disease except MPS 6. This is incredibly important to the topic today of personalized and targeted medicine. Naglazyme only works in MPS 6. The 1,100 patients that we think are out there, that is the total, I'll use a business term now, that's the total market for naglazyme. There's no such thing as what the doctors would call off-label usage. Did you hear about, this isn't really for that disease, but I'm going to prescribe it to you because I think it will help. There's no reason the doctor should give naglazyme to anybody but somebody with MPS 6. So I'm going to broaden this out and talk about the basic model for commercial drug development. Commercial means to make a profit, to be a self-sustaining business entity. 4 very simple blocks on this slide. Each one of these is incredibly expensive and extensive, and complicated. So the basic model starts with discovery and then goes into preclinical development, then clinical development, and then regulatory approval. I'll walk you through each of these because this is how diseases are treated these days. So discovery means to figure out the biological basis for disease and to hypothesize routes of treatment. And this is really what you call basic research, basic science. We're really basic understandings of biology, molecular biology, biochemistry, to create theories of what will work. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of diseases out there in the world. So one of the questions I'm often asked is, how does BioOrient pick 4 diseases? How do you get there? Well, most companies these days are not doing the basic research themselves. They're looking for basic research that has been done elsewhere. They're looking for other people to dig through the haystack and find the needles. And most drug companies these days, the discovery engine of those companies is outside of that company. And it's happening in academic institutions and very often startups. In biotechnology, the classic startup is a startup founded by 1 or 2 or 5 people to develop one treatment for one disease. In fact, that's exactly how BioOrient started. You saw that list of diseases. MPS 1 was how BioOrient started. One treatment for one disease. With somebody's smart idea and pumping some money into it to try to see if it's going to work. So discovery these days is typically happening in academia or in startups. This whole process is so long-term and expensive that a startup very, very rarely make it to the stage of BioOrient or Genentech or some of the bigger self-sustaining companies. What the startup will typically do is have one great idea and sell it. Sell the idea, sell the company, and sell it to some entity with a lot of money. In this case, BioOrient having the ability to invest in development of therapy. Or there may be academic institutions that will license their idea to a drug company. BioOrient just a couple months ago announced a license with University College London about a potential therapy I'll talk about later in this talk. The University College London then shares in that going forward. They're able to contribute expertise to BioOrient, and if BioOrient is successful in investing in that therapy, the University College London is able to share in the eventual financial success. So the process of discovery is asking the question, might we have a drug? Might this thing be a drug someday? That question is then refined in the second block called preclinical development. The idea of preclinical, well, let me do a definition of terms first, actually. So clinical is an important word here. Clinic means, in the clinic means treatment of humans. And there are a lot of hurdles you need to go through before you're even allowed to try a potential drug in humans. So BioOrient cannot take that thing we just licensed from University College London and put it in a syringe and stick it in somebody's arm. That is totally illegal. And it's unethical, and it's unsafe, and it's nothing that a drug company is going to do. Before it can get to the clinic where it can be tried in humans, BioOrient or other drug companies have to go through a process called proof of concept. It's a term that's used in most scientific or academic fields. The idea of proof of concept is to take this question of might this be a drug and answer the questions, might this work and is it safe? So preclinical development involves experiments that are done in laboratories and in animals to determine proof of concept and safety. I'll pause on this topic of animals for a second. This is a very sensitive topic, controversial maybe, but because the hurdle is so high for trying something in humans, there's literally no pharmaceutical product that can be approved by a regulatory agency that hasn't been tested in animals. So I have bad allergies. I took Allegra this morning because otherwise I'd be sneezing up here. Allegra would not be on the shelves today if it wasn't tested in animals. And so it's something that's, we all probably are using pharmaceutical products at some point during the course of a month or a year. Those have all been tested in animals. So I just want to point that out. It's not unique to BioMarin. It's actually required in order to go through this process of preclinical development. So the process of preclinical development, a lot of this has to do with molecular fine-tuning. Sometimes the molecule that's the basis of the therapy doesn't work right in animals or in tissue samples, or sometimes it's clearly proven to be unsafe. And so a lot of the work in preclinical development is actually back to the discovery folks to fine-tune a molecule. So how do you do that? How do you fine-tune a molecule? Well, one example is BioMarin is working on a program in clinical development right now that treats a rare disease called PKU. We already have one treatment for PKU on the market. This is another treatment for very severe forms of PKU, which is a metabolic disorder that over time causes toxicity to the brain from eating normal food, and that toxicity to the brain is harmful. It's less rare than other forms of disease, and in fact, some people in this room might even have PKU. This treatment for PKU is it's an enzyme, so that may sound familiar now. And what was found in preclinical testing is that the enzyme itself was very likely to cause severe allergic reactions when administered to patients. And so BioMarin had a challenge. We knew that the allergic reactions would be severe enough that actually this thing would never be approved for use in humans. But we knew that the underlying molecule had a very good potential to significantly improve PKU. So we thought in preclinical development that, yes, this thing could be a drug, but no, we don't think it's safe. So we went back to the labs, and the lab researchers added basically additional molecules around the existing active ingredient to coat it in this substance called PEG. Each molecule is coated in PEG. It's like wrapping something in plastic almost. And when administered, the body is less likely to attack the PEG molecule. So preclinical development is going to fine-tune the molecule to establish a baseline of safety and a potential for efficacy. When a company feels a high level of confidence that something in preclinical development might work, they're going to gear up for clinical trials. Probably a term you've all heard. Clinical trials is exactly what it sounds like. It's trying the therapy in the clinic in humans. In order to even start clinical trials, a company must file an application with the FDA or regulatory agencies in other countries where the trial will be done. That application must contain extensive documentation of the discovery, preclinical development, to give the regulators confidence that what's being tried actually has a decent shot of working and that it's safe enough to not produce adverse harm to the recipients. So from discovery to clinical development, this is years. This is not, developing an app that's going to take a week or a month, or a software platform that's going to take a year or 2 years. Oftentimes, discovery to the clinic is going to be 5 to 10 years. So clinical development, under the standards developed by the FDA and other agencies, requires multiple phases of development. So you may have heard of this. So-and-so has a drug that's in phase 3 trials. What does that mean? There are 3 classic phases of drug development in the clinic. A phase 1 trial is a very small study in terms of the number of patients. And the primary measurements that are being conducted in that study are around safety. First things first, let's make sure it's safe. Along the way, we'll gather measurements of efficacy. Will it work? The phase 1 trial is all about safety. Learning about how the drug works. Studying what does it do when it hits the liver, which is processing foreign materials. What is it doing in the the cells that are needing treatment and what's it doing in the cells that are not needing treatment. A phase 2 trial will typically expand the phase 1 population. So in a rare disease, a phase 1 trial might be 15 or 20 patients. In a bigger disease like high blood pressure, phase 1 might be thousands. But for rare diseases, it's a very small trial. A phase 2 trial will expand that number and will shift the focus from safety to efficacy. There will still be measures of safety, but you're really trying to target how well does this thing work. And a phase 3 trial is what's called a pivotal trial. It's called a pivotal trial because it's the pivot point of whether this thing would be approved by an agency for sale. A pivotal phase 3 trial is typically what's called a randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded study. Randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded. So that's all wrapped up in the concept of a placebo control, which means some people in a phase 3 trial will get the active drug and some people will get an inactive substance, the old sugar pill model. It's a little different when you're trying an enzyme replacement therapy. You're actually giving a 4-hour infusion of something that doesn't work. But you have to do that to prove with statistical significance about whether the drug actually works. The concepts are randomized and double-blind. Randomized means it's not in BioMarin's control of which patient in the trial is going to get the active ingredient and which trial is going to get a placebo. A third party is used. A randomized sequence is used to assign placebo or active. And then the third party is shipping the drug to the physicians who are treating the patients. Double-blind means both the physician and the patient are unaware of whether they're getting placebo or active drug. So there's no chance of a placebo effect. Yeah, I think this is working. Or I think I'm itchy, I'm having an allergic rash. So wrapped up in all of that is that BioMarin is actually not treating the patients. We have lots of MDs at BioMarin. Of our 1,200 employees, we probably have 40 MDs. Like a little hospital, but we're not treating patients ourselves. In fact, we're not allowed to. The protocol for testing drugs in clinical development is to work with hospitals and research institutions and to have their physicians administer the trial. So BioMarin designs the trial, creates the molecule, hands it off to the physicians who administer the drug, gather the data. And on the back end, we have statisticians that are going to analyze the data. There's a chain of control of the data to make sure nobody's playing with it along the way. So a phase 3 clinical trial is one of the biggest inflection points in the life of a biotech company. Inflection point meaning where the line changes. Because it's make or break, it's a pivotal trial. A positive phase 3 result, meaning clearly of statistical significance in an improvement in the underlying disease. A positive phase 3 result almost always leads to approval by the FDA or other regulatory agencies that be able to sell the drug. A negative phase 3 result, meaning lack of statistical significance, is usually the end of the line for that potential therapy. Development is usually stopped at that point because this is so expensive. From discovery to clinical development, the ranges are out there. You can read about them online. Typically is $100 million to $500 million. Because people's lives are at stake. So you have a positive phase 3 result. Your next step is to file an extensive filing with the FDA or other agencies. I keep saying that because different countries have different agencies. If we want to sell the drug in Brazil, We have to go to the Brazil regulatory agency and redo the filing we already did with the FDA. We're in the process of filing an application with the FDA after a phase 3 trial that we just finished last year. We just filed it a few weeks ago. The filing itself was 1.3 million pages. I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. 1.3 million pages of documentation sent to the FDA. And now we wait. Why do we wait? Because they have to read 1.3 million pages. But we have statistical significance in our phase 3 trial. We have an incredible array of hope for patients with another different kind of lysosomal storage disease. And we hope in November we'll find out whether that will be approved by the FDA. So this is all in the business of biotechnology. Biotechnology is using biological sciences, like genetics and various forms of biology, to solve problems and make products. Biotechnology is often distinguished from pharmaceutical, even though BioMarin is pharmaceutical in its name, because the traditional pharmaceutical company is using chemistry, chemical synthesis, to create compounds that will wind up in pills, shots. Biotechnology is usually taking advantage of natural biological processes to make treatments for disease. And so people think biotechnology is new and sexy. Here's a picture from the early days of biotechnology. Yes. So biotechnology is not new. Maybe it's sexy, but it's not new. Taking advantage of natural biological processes is as old as farming. Things like, if this farmer wants their ox to be really strong, the next generation of oxes, you take your strongest male and your strongest female, and leave them alone for a while. And then you get a strong ox. And then your kids have strong oxes. Same with breeding plants to make sure plants are more resilient, more flavorful, more productive. Biotechnology is in many forms. Here's one of my favorites. I don't know if you can see that. Says Anchor Brewing. Anchor Brewery. Beer making is biotechnology. I mean, you can put hops and barley in water in a bucket. It's not going to do much until you add the yeast. You're putting those yeast to work, like baking bread. You're putting the biological processes to work to make something productive. But really, this was not used in drug development because the processes were not very well understood, well characterized, the technologies weren't there until the early 70s. This guy's name is Herb Boyer. Down here at the bottom, this is Time Magazine from 1981. That says Genentech's Herbert Boyer, shaping life in the lab, the boom in genetic engineering. Also up in the upper right, Princess Diana. It says Prince Charles picks a bride. So it may seem like an eternity ago. Some of you may not remember that. Not around, but in the life cycle of treatment for disease, this is very recent. Herb Boyer was a researcher at UC San Francisco, and working with his lab, theorized the possibility of taking fragments of biological things and using a process a little bit like brewing beer to clone those fragments. He did it in 1972, one of the most famous studies in medical science, by causing a cell culture to produce copies of insulin in the treatment of diabetes. I'm going to really boil this down. Took little pieces of insulin, seriously, really boiling it down, inserted them cells, which then made copies of themselves. And every time the cell made a copy of itself, it made a copy of what was inside. So if I had handouts today of this material, and I wanted all of them to say, Mark has green eyes, I would write Mark has green eyes on the master copy, shoot off 700 photocopies and pass them out. Everyone would say, Mark has green eyes. This is the basic concept behind Herb Boyer's work of being able to use naturally occurring cell division to create exact copies of active agents. Herb was approached by a guy named Bob Swanson. Herb and Bob, over a beer, decided to look for some money to form a company. And that company was Genentech. And if you go to the Genentech campus in South San Francisco, there's a bronze statue right outside the research building. It's called the Founders Research Center. The statue is of Herb and Bob with pints of beer. And it is the memorialization of the founding of Genentech and the beginnings of the biotechnology industry. Along the way, Genentech became one of the world's biggest drug companies. It received a large investment from Roche, a Swiss pharmaceutical company. And in the last decade, Roche bought Genentech lock, stock, and barrel. Genentech is now wholly owned by Roche Pharmaceuticals. But Roche was smart enough not to change the name. It's still called Genentech. And in fact, Roche moved a lot of their work to Genentech's labs and offices because Genentech was doing something that Roche wasn't, which was really advancing the field of medical science. Even though this was 30 years after Genentech started, that leadership was still there. And these are some of the early names in biotechnology. Genentech, Biogen, Amgen, Genzyme, they all have Gen in them. Genentech stands for Genetic Engineering Technology. These were the early trailblazers, and they're all around in some form or other. Genentech is owned by Roche. Genzyme was bought 2 years ago by Sanofi Aventis, a French pharmaceutical company. Biogen is on the buying side. Biogen has bought a number of companies from the world's biggest drug makers. They're headquartered in Massachusetts. Amgen is headquartered in Thousand Oaks, California. But they all started with this same concept from the Herb Boyer scientific family tree. There's been a lot that's learned in the 4 decades since those companies took root. One of the main lessons here is that drug development is an incredibly costly and risky endeavor. I've talked about these treatments going from the labs to the marketplace. I've neglected to mention that the overwhelming majority of the ideas that come out of the labs in the biotech industry fail. In fact, the overwhelming majority of ideas never even make it to human clinical trials. And the majority of drugs in phase 1 trial never makes it to phase 3 trial. So you have this increasing probability curve as you go from discovery to phase 3. And even in phase 3, there are a lot, I don't know what the percentages are. It's probably about 50-50 in terms of failure versus success. So, risky and expensive. Let's spend $300 million on something that's probably going to fail. Therefore, profits are very elusive. These are commercial endeavors, trying to make a business off it. BioMarin has been around for 16 years. We have 4 drugs on the market. We have $500 million of revenue each year. BioMarin is not profitable. Each year, BioMarin spends more money than it makes. That's not because we want to. Believe me, we'd love to be profitable. Our investors would really like us to be profitable. a tolerance for that lack of profit, especially for companies who bust through the early stage where failure is the most likely outcome. If you can bust through and get a product or two or three to the market, then you're on track for profitability. Investors are very patient with that in biotechnology. As long as you're managing your risks, trending toward profitability, they'll give you a pass. And I'll tell you, if it's 10 years from now, and BioMarin's given a presentation to people who are 10 years old right now, and that presenter says BioMarin's not profitable, well, that's not going to happen. And there's not another 10 years worth of patience for BioMarin to try to get profitable. Profits are very elusive. There's patience in the investor community, but only so much. And because failure is so likely and profits are elusive, the therapies are very expensive. The actual cost of the drug is very expensive. This is a really important topic these days. It's a social issue, an economic issue, a political issue that you really can hardly read the newspapers for a week without seeing some story about drug prices. Time magazine article 2 months ago called Bitter Pill. It was about the cost of the healthcare industry. A big part of that was about drug prices. It's the best-selling issue of Time magazine in the last 2 years. The therapies are expensive because without the high cost of therapy, there's no way that the company is going to be able to have enough money to produce new therapies. It's a real tail-chasing paradox. If you're going to spend that much money to develop a therapy, you need to charge a lot of money in order to pay back what you already spent. And then plow some of that back into the next drugs, which is going to be expensive, and the cycle's complete. So biotech products, this is not my box of Allegra that'll last me 2 weeks is $12. It seemed like a lot, $12. This is not $12. This is thousands, tens of thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for the therapy. Naglazyme for MPS 6 is in the 6 figures per year for the typical patient. So how does Elena's family afford that? Well, Elena's family doesn't. Elena's family pays a copay, just like I would for my antihistamine. So the burden is spread across insurance companies, and outside the United States, the most common payers in the healthcare system are governments. In many cases, governments that are broke. You followed the economic situation in the last few years. You've heard about Greece. Greece is in pretty rough shape financially. We have MPS 6 patients in Greece. The Greek government pays for Naglazyme. Naglazyme is very expensive. So you can be absolutely sure that the Greek government is asking BioMarin to come prove itself in front of commissions, boards of the federal government in Greece. And time again, Naglazyme and BioMarin's other therapies are approved for payment because these kids are really sick, and because without therapy, they will die very young. And because, as a portion of the total Greek healthcare system, the 5 or 10 people that BioMarin has in Greece is a tiny, tiny fraction of the total healthcare expense. Now, the cynics in the room, here we've got cynics saying, he's just up there justifying price gouging. And you are absolutely welcome to that opinion. But having been in the industry and seen the kind of work that's being done for people like Elena, and living the reality of budget pressures we have at BioMarin just like every other company, I can tell you to eke out success this is not price gouging. So competition is fierce. For BioMarin competition, we don't have other companies developing therapies for MPS 6. For those 1,100 patients in the world, do you think another company is going to go spend $300 million? market share? No. But our competition, BioMarin's competition, is for those next therapies that we're trying to invest in. The startups who have a great idea, the academic institutions like University College London, who have a fantastic idea. So we're competing for that next phase, that next drug, that next development program. Because of all this, protected markets are essential. This is a marketing and sales term. A protected market means it's very difficult for somebody to come in and compete. And so for us, the protected markets, that means that we are the only treater of MPS 6. We don't expect another company to come along and compete for MPS 6. So that's a very successful model for BioMarin. Whereas, I talked about high blood pressure before, dozens and dozens of high blood pressure medications, all trying to carve away at this total population of millions of people in the world with high blood pressure. Trying to carve away to make a small impact on a big population. And BioMarin has turned that upside down to try to make a big impact on a small population. So much of this success and progress is based upon unlocking the genome, understanding the genetic basis for disease and treatment. Probably heard of the genome and probably studied it. So your hereditary makeup, the DNA sequence. Really the roots of studying the genome go back to a very bold initiative by the Reagan administration. This was after that Time magazine Herb Boyer cover, where the federal government saw promise here that if they could pump money into unlocking the genome, that then there could be a boom in pharmaceutical R&D, biotech R&D. It could be a boom in treatment and the advancement of well-being. Last week, President Obama announced an initiative like this on the study of the brain. You may have heard of it. And in fact, referenced back in his remarks to the Human Genome Project in 1987, that it's going to take a bold step to set the wheels in motion to understand, unlock, diagnose, treat, etc. So there are a lot of commercial endeavors and applications that have been spawned from the Human Genome Project, including this targeting of genetic disorders. So genetic disorder, this is what BioMarin does. We are focusing on diseases that result from abnormalities in the genome. So for Elena with MPS 6, she's got a mutation in her genome that's causing this disease to occur. And understanding that mutation allows us to diagnose and treat the problem. But Elena's disease is only one of 4,000 diseases that are produced by what are called single gene defects. There are other diseases that are multi-gene defects, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of problems, interactions and problems within the genome. But Elena's got this one thing wrong with the genome. And there's 4,000 diseases like that. And only a few dozen that have been treated by companies like BioMarin and products like Naglazyme. But to be clear, that enzyme replacement thing I talked about, we're not fixing the genetic problem. We're targeting a treatment that's based upon that genetic problem. And it's personalized to Elena and targeted to her situation because only people with MPS 6 will benefit from the treatment with Naglazyme. Talk in a minute, there's promise, there's hope out there for actually being able to fix the problems at an underlying level. So let me talk about a few examples of targeted treatments. Hopefully we'll have time for a few questions in a little while. So one example of the targeted treatment, I've talked about this over and over again, is Naglazyme. We have MPS 6 caused by a genetic defect, and we have Naglazyme providing patients with the enzyme that they're missing as a result of the defect. This is the kind of approach that was used by Genzyme, the company you saw earlier. They've developed a number of treatments like this, enzyme replacement therapies. But I will say that Genentech, referred to a number of times, their first approaches were not personalized therapies. In fact, Genentech got big fast in the late 80s with a drug that was an enzyme. But the enzyme was what they call a clot buster. And if somebody has a heart attack or a stroke, what will ultimately lead to damage or death for those individuals is often blood clots that form as the result of that problem. So Genentech developed Activase, which is a clot-busting enzyme. That's not a personalized or targeted therapy. Almost, we're all at risk for heart attack or stroke. And what Genentech figured out how to do is find an enzyme that actually breaks through the clots. So if you go to the hospital, if you're having a stroke, you're having a heart attack, almost everybody these days who goes to the hospital with a heart attack or stroke is going to get Activase. Genentech developed so long ago. But that's not a targeted therapy. Even though it's an enzyme like magnesium, it's targeted to breaking up clots. But one of the problems that happens is it can produce bleeding because it's weakening the cardiovascular system that will also produce those clots. But magnesium is targeted and personalized because it goes right to the source for people like Elena and only people like Elena. Here's another targeted approach being developed by Brian Moran. This is something that's in a phase 2 trial right now. It's a type of potential cancer treatment. There's no such treatment on the market yet. There are a few companies racing to get to the market. So this is part of our competition, is to try to get to the market first. It's experimental therapy for the treatment of certain genetically defined cancers. So there's been a lot of research over the last 10 years, 15 years, about the genetic basis for cancer. And Genentech was one of the first companies to capitalize on this by developing a therapy for breast cancer called Herceptin, which was theorized and proven to work for people who have a certain genetic defect. BioMarin is working on a different type of therapy for the same concept. That there are certain genetic mutations in genes called BRCA, B-R-C-A, BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations that dramatically increase the chances that somebody will get a certain type of cancer, especially breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And in fact, with certain BRCA mutations, a woman has a 50% higher chance of developing ovarian cancer than if they don't have that genetic mutation. And that is a terrible set of odds. But the concept of a PARP inhibitor is that the same genetic problem that's predisposing those people to disease will predispose those cancers to be receptive to this type of treatment. A PARP inhibitor inhibits an enzyme that tumors need in order to grow. And the theory is that people with that same genetic defect will be more likely to have successful outcomes with treatment with the PARP inhibitor. We're very excited about the progress of this program, and we're going to be announcing results of our early stage trial in June. Keep your eye on BioMarin and the treatment of PARP inhibitors. We'd love to be the first therapy on the market in a few years for the treatment of certain genetically defined cancers with PARP inhibitors. And for people with BRCA mutations, with a 30 to 40 to 50% higher chance of getting breast cancer or ovarian cancer. It's a tremendous amount of hope. Another example, this is what we licensed from University College London. And this is kind of the holy grail of not just treating something that's resulting from a genetic mutation, but of actually fixing the genetic mutation. Hemophilia is a disorder that leads to bleeding, uncontrollable bleeding. Cuts lead to bleeds. Small bruises lead to major bruises, inflammation, swelling, joint damage. And there are treatments, actually from biotechnology, for hemophilia that are much like enzyme replacement therapy. You are given what's missing in your body that leads to those bleeds happening. But the idea behind this potential therapy is to actually insert a fixed copy, a correct copy of the right gene into the cells so that the cells can produce the enzymes that can stop the bleeding from happening. So getting fixed genes into cells is literally science fiction. It's been the subject of a lot of movies over the last 20 years. There's only been one therapy approved by the FDA using this concept. It's not for hemophilia. We hope to be the first gene therapy treatment for hemophilia, which affects hundreds of thousands of people around the world. The idea is to use what they call a viral vector. We hired this guy, he's the VP of vector biology. My staff is like, vector biology, what's that? A vector means something like an arrow, right? Vector is a map. A viral vector means you're going to actually take a virus, deactivate what's going to make that virus make you sick, put the fixed gene into the virus, inject the virus into the human with that fixed gene. Viruses are really good at getting into cells. The viruses go into the cell with the fixed copy of the gene. So as those cells replicate themselves, they will replicate a fixed copy of the gene. So personalized medicine, just to recap this, it takes treatment, tailors it to the individual's personal characteristics, either the root cause of disease or the response to specific treatment. And it concentrates the benefits on those who have the disorder. And it spares everybody else from the cost, the expense, the disruption, the side effects. If they don't have the predisposition or the underlying genetic condition, they're not eligible to treat. The treatment would do more harm than good. So we're in a place where mass market genetic testing is right here and it's right now. You may have heard of companies that have built businesses around genetic testing. One of the first was a company called Myriad Genetics, who developed the test for the BRCA gene that I talked about a minute ago. Myriad Genetics took the work of the Human Genome Project and focused it on being able to sequence some of these genomes to target specific genetic defects. It's a company called 23andMe, you may have heard of, and that's a mass market genetic test. They will sequence your genome. What used to cost $1 million to sequence one person's genome is now in the thousands of dollars. I'm not sure what their retail cost is, but it's a retail product. I think it's $5,000 or so you can have your genome sequenced. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to know, I don't want to know. But some people are very curious. Another example of mass market genetic testing, my wife works at Ancestry.com, and they have a beta product that's now going commercial to map your geographic hereditary origin with a saliva sample. And so we were in the beta test. We did it. It blew my mind. I grew up thinking these green eyes, they're from the British Isles. I thought I was like half British. And Ancestry.com told me, in fact, I am 0% British. I'm not kidding you. 0. There were Brits in my background. They didn't come from Great Britain or the British Isles. They came from Scandinavia. I'm a Viking. And there was this, 10% was from Turkey. I had no idea I had any Turkish origin. And then, putting together some thoughts for this talk, I was thinking about this green eyes thing. Green eyes are very prevalent in Turkey and in Scandinavia. Ding, ding, ding. So, the focus on treatment of rare genetic diseases is now a really big thing in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. And a lot of that has to do with the basic business model. All those companies trying to treat high blood pressure, high cholesterol, with all that competition, patents that expire. Once a patent expires, the drug goes to generic. Once a generic is introduced, you can't make any profit on your drug anymore. Over the last 2 years, 7 of the top 10 selling pharmaceutical products in the world have gone generic, meaning the companies that spent all the money to develop them and earned all the money from that no longer earn that money. And so they're looking for protected markets. They're looking for ways to develop treatments that have very little competition, have a longer time to pay back all the R&D that was done. So So you see big pharmaceutical companies very, very interested in this crazy stuff that companies like BioMarin started doing 16 years ago. The more information and the more focus, information from the genome and genetic testing, more focus from more companies means more innovation. BioMarin used to be fairly unique. We're now unique in the size that we've achieved in focusing on rare genetic diseases, but no longer unique in focusing on rare diseases. And honestly, we think that's a great thing. 4,000 single gene defect diseases. We can't treat them all. Now, we welcome everyone who wants to come work on those. The pressure on drug prices is a very, very big thing these days. Political pressure, social pressure, economic pressure. If drug prices are kind of squashed politically or economically, then companies like BioMarin are going to struggle and maybe fold. So it's a very real challenge that we're seeing. Every week, there's some reporter calling my corporate communications director to ask for an interview about our drugs, but they're always asking about drug pricing. And that was not the case a couple years ago. And really, this all results in personalized medicine in the mainstream. We want you to be fluent in this topic of personalized medicine because someday it might help you, it might help your kids, another family member, a friend. And for people like me, maybe people like you, it can be a really, really exciting career path. With BioMarin right here in the North Bay, we have 150 jobs open right now. I am not kidding, 150 jobs open. Very stiff competition for those jobs. But these are very, very strong labor markets. We're also opening about 30 internships this summer. I think they're all posted. So take a look. You don't have to be a researcher to work in a company like BioMarin and make a real difference in personalized medicine. So I think I have a few minutes for questions. If anybody wants to raise your hand and then speak very loudly if you've got one. I hear, hey, Lynn, what? The dean. Yes. Oh boy, so the question is how to help people prepare for this demand for genetic information. I don't have an easy answer. What I will say is most physicians these days, whether they are geneticists, and this is their field of study, or whether they're pediatricians or general practitioners, are being asked these kind of questions. And so one of the things that BioMarin is helping to do, talks like this and working with medical schools, is to try to broaden the discussion. We want physicians to be conversant. And I think physicians need to be conversant because everybody's asking. So this is going to sound like a standard pharmaceutical company answer, but your answer is talk to your physician. It's a great place to start. People can obsess over this and worry about it. This was the WebMD effect 10 years ago when they first had their diagnostic thing. I have a niece who's your age, actually. I talked to her and she's like, I'm freaking out. I think I have 5 different diseases. I'm like, what's wrong? I have a stuffy nose. Let's go with allergies. But it's very, very scary. So part of that was just educate yourself. If you're really worried, talk to your physician. And I'm sure, half of us are some kind of ticking time bomb. It's not reassuring. But what's reassuring to me is that was true 50 years ago. And there's very little way to target the answer to you. Any other questions? question was about having scientific literacy without scientific training. For me, it's a necessity. So, especially in my role as one of the executives in the company, I report directly to the CEO, and CEO staff meetings for 6 or 7 people, and we are just talking science. Even the financials is about science. And even the HR planning is about science. And so I learned a long time ago at Genentech, actually, what I learned was if I couldn't be fluent at a basic level in science, then I couldn't participate in the real discussions about business. And I've seen people try to skate by without really becoming a student of it themselves, and failures in it. And if I will say, at Genentech, this is a very high-performing culture. It still is to this day. And the best thing I did for my own reputation and credibility there was carry around a calculator, honestly, and I used it. But that was a signal that I am ready to talk numbers, and I'm ready to learn about the science that you're doing. So these days, I have a staff of about 20 people across 3 different sub-departments. And our staff meetings are almost all about science. So we're not sitting around, we're doing all the work on HR, communications, and facility strategy. But when we're talking about PARP inhibitors, we're talking about enzyme replacement therapies, we're talking about viral vectors. And I literally give my staff pop quizzes. This is a true story. About once a quarter, I will give them a pop quiz on the science. It helps me learn it and understand it. It certainly makes them learn it. And it puts their focus on being a contributor to the scientific endeavor rather than some bolt-on thing over on the side. So it's a way of life. How I did it was by listening and engaging. And one of the things that makes it easy is it's also freaking cool. It's just really cool. And that's when I first started at Genentech, I was just eating it up. And so I'm sure there's people in this room who will tell me I got 1 or 2 things wrong today, by the way. But I'm not a prescribing physician, so hopefully I won't see it in court. But really, I would apply that to any endeavor that you do, whether it's business or academia or nonprofit, is to be able to be conversant in the what of the organization, and not just the what of your job, so that you can contribute to the enterprise, and not just to your job. Lynn, any other questions?
Okay.